The moment my husband abandoned me for having a girl instead of a boy, I thought my world had ended. But when I discovered their real plan to steal my baby through the courts while calling her worthless, I realized this wasn't about gender preference. This was about complete control. What they didn't know is that I'd been recording everything, and their attempt to destroy me would backfire so spectacularly that the entire internet would witness their downfall. Right at that moment when I should have been celebrating the happiest news of my life, I had no idea I was walking into a trap that had been set years before I even met my husband. Let me take you back to the beginning, because understanding how deep this betrayal runs requires knowing just how perfectly they played their long game. My name is Aspen, and for 4 years, I thought I had married into a loving family. Sure, my mother-in-law and I never quite clicked the way some daughters-in-law do with their husbands' mothers, but we were always civil, always polite. I chalked up our differences to personality quirks and generational gaps. What I didn't realize was that she was studying me, cataloging my every weakness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The warning signs were there, disguised as harmless family jokes that made my stomach turn just slightly each time I heard them. If your first baby is a girl, she won't really count as the first grandchild. They'd laugh around the dinner table. All the real firstborns in this family are boys, his father would add with a chuckle. Girls are lovely, of course, but boys carry on the family name, the family legacy. My husband would nod along, sometimes even joining in with comments about how important it was for him to have a son first, to be the leader for all his younger siblings. Every single time these comments came up, something inside me recoiled. But I smiled. I laughed. I told myself I was being too sensitive, that families have different dynamics, different values. I was so desperate to fit in, so eager to be accepted, that I ignored every single red flag waving frantically in front of my face. The pressure intensified when we started trying for a baby. My husband was the last of his siblings to have children, and the family had made it crystal clear that this baby needed to be a boy to maintain their precious tradition. The weight of that expectation sat heavy on my shoulders every single day, but I pushed it down, focusing instead on the joy of creating life with the man I loved. We approached getting pregnant with scientific precision. I tracked my cycles religiously, we scheduled intimate moments around ovulation windows, and we turned conception into a project filled with charts, calendars, and careful planning. It took 3 months, which felt like an eternity when you're anxious about fertility issues that run in your family. When that positive test finally appeared, we were absolutely overjoyed. The conversations that followed were pure magic. We spent hours discussing baby names, nursery themes, and playfully arguing about whether we were having a son or daughter. He'd pat my belly and say, "How's my son doing today?" And I'd respond with, "Your daughter is doing just fine. Thank you very much." It became our adorable little routine, this back and forth banter about the gender of our unborn child. But what I thought was innocent excitement was actually my husband reporting every single detail back to his mother, who was building a case against me that would soon destroy everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust. But the tragedy had not stopped yet. In fact, the most devastating blow was still coming, disguised as what should have been the most beautiful moment of our pregnancy journey. The week leading up to our gender reveal appointment was filled with the kind of anticipation that makes time crawl. I threw myself into researching every old wives' tale I could find, creating this elaborate chart that we could fill out together like some kind of pregnancy game show. We tested everything. The ring test where you dangle your wedding ring over your belly, the Chinese gender prediction calendar, analyzing my cravings, checking the baby's heartbeat patterns, even examining how I was carrying. My husband seemed genuinely excited as we worked through each ridiculous prediction method. We'd laugh at the contradictions, argue playfully about which tests were more accurate, and build up this delicious suspense together. The results ended up being split almost perfectly 50-50, which somehow made us even more eager to find out the truth at our ultrasound appointment. The morning of our scan, I remember feeling this pure, electric excitement coursing through my veins. We held hands in the waiting room, both of us practically vibrating with anticipation. When the technician finally moved that wand across my belly and announced, "Congratulations, you're having a daughter," the room exploded with joy. My husband's face lit up like Christmas morning. He squeezed my hand so tight it almost hurt and whispered, "I can't wait to raise a little girl with you." For those precious few hours, everything felt perfect. We spent the afternoon calling our families, sharing the incredible news with everyone we loved. My parents were absolutely thrilled. My mom immediately started planning shopping trips for tiny dresses and hair bows. When we called as family, The initial reaction seemed positive enough. Congratulations were offered, excitement was expressed, but there was something in his mother's voice that felt off, strained, like she was reading from a script. Then came the request that changed everything. "Can I speak to my son privately for a moment?" she asked, and something cold settled in my stomach. What could possibly need to be discussed privately about our baby announcement? But I smiled, kissed my husband on the cheek, and headed to our bedroom, expecting him to join me within minutes. An hour passed. Then two. I could hear the murmur of his voice through the walls, occasionally rising in tone, but I couldn't make out the words. By the third hour, I was pacing our bedroom, anxiety clawing at my chest. What conversation about our baby girl could possibly take this long? I fell asleep alone that night, completely unaware that while I dreamed about our daughter's future, my husband was being systematically turned against me by a woman who had been planning this moment for 4 years. When I woke up the next morning, the other side of our bed was cold and empty. On my husband's nightstand sat a single piece of paper that would shatter my world into a million pieces. "Someone will be by to pick up my belongings tonight." No explanation, no goodbye, no signature. Just those devastating words that meant my marriage, my family, and my future had ended while I slept. No one expected what came next, because the explanation I was about to receive was so completely unhinged, so divorced from reality, that I questioned whether I was losing my mind or living in some kind of alternate universe. My hand shook as I dialed my husband's number, desperate for answers, for some explanation that would make sense of this nightmare. The phone didn't even ring, straight to voicemail. He had blocked me. The man who had held my hand through morning sickness, who had assembled our baby's crib with tears of joy in his eyes just weeks before, had erased me from his life like I never existed. Fighting back panic, I called his mother, and she answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting for this moment. Before I could even speak, before I could ask what had happened or beg for help reaching my husband, she launched into the most vicious verbal assault I had ever experienced. "You manipulative bitch," she snarled through the phone. "You've ruined my son's reputation with your inexcusable behaviors and tendencies." I stood there in my empty bedroom, pregnant and abandoned, listening to this woman destroy me with words like weapons. When I finally managed to stammer out, "What are you talking about? What did I do?" her response was so shocking that I actually laughed out loud from pure disbelief. She accused me of orchestrating our baby's gender. Not hoping for a girl, not preferring a daughter, but actually manipulating the conception process to guarantee we'd have a female child specifically to destroy their family legacy. According to her twisted logic, I had forced my husband to have sex with me on the exact day that the Chinese horoscope would point to a girl. She had interrogated him about our intimate positions, smugly informing me that what we did made it 60% more likely to conceive a female. The conversation became so surreal that I had the presence of mind to start recording it on my phone. This woman was explaining to me, with complete seriousness, that my choice to track my ovulation cycle was evidence of my master plan to undermine their family. She claimed that my preference for my own family name was disgusting, that I had been plotting for years to dilute their bloodline with inferior genetics. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn, because this wasn't just about gender disappointment or family traditions. For over a month, I heard nothing from my husband. Complete radio silence. I was staying with my sister, trying to process the fact that the man I loved had vanished from my life over something as natural and uncontrollable as our baby's gender. I kept telling myself that surely he would come to his senses, that surely he couldn't be so easily manipulated by his mother's delusions. Then I decided to confront him directly. I waited outside his workplace one evening, and when he finally appeared, the man I saw wasn't the loving husband I remembered. He looked through me like I was a stranger, and when he finally spoke, his words confirmed my worst fears. He admitted that yes, he had been excited about our daughter, but his mother had opened his eyes to my true nature. She had convinced him that I was manipulative, abusive, controlling, everything I had never been. What he said next about our unborn child would haunt me for months and reveal just how deep this conspiracy truly went. Right at that moment when I thought the cruelty had reached its peak, my husband looked me dead in the eye and called our daughter, "the thing that's growing inside of you," making it clear he'd have no problem giving me full custody since he wanted nothing to do with her. I should have felt relief. After weeks of agonizing over losing my husband, after enduring his mother's vicious accusations and his complete abandonment, here he was essentially signing away his parental rights. My daughter would be safe from their toxicity. I could raise her alone, away from people who saw her as nothing more than a disappointment wrapped in pink blankets. But something about his tone, something about the cold calculation in his eyes, made my maternal instincts scream danger. This wasn't the merciful end to a nightmare. This was the calm before an even more devastating storm. I tried one last time to reach the man I had fallen in love with. "We could make this work," I pleaded. "We could raise our daughter together, away from your mother's influence. She doesn't have to control our family." But he just stared at me with dead eyes and repeated that he finally understood how manipulative and abusive I had been throughout our entire relationship. The divorce papers, he informed me, were already written up and ready to file. That's when I discovered that giving up and taking full custody were two completely different things in their twisted minds. The phone call that shattered my last remaining hope came from my sister-in-law, the one person in his family who had always been kind to me. She had been my lifeline during the early weeks of pregnancy, sharing tips for morning sickness and offering the kind of support I should have been getting from my own husband. Her voice was shaky when she called, clearly terrified of what she was about to tell me. She had overheard a conversation at their weekly Sunday dinner that made her sick to her stomach. My mother-in-law and husband weren't just planning to divorce me. They were plotting to ambush me in court and fight for full custody of my daughter. The same child they claimed was worthless, the same baby my husband had referred to as a thing, was suddenly worth destroying me over in a legal battle. The contradiction was so staggering that I initially couldn't process it. They didn't want her, but they also couldn't stand the thought of me raising her. They saw her as a genetic disappointment, but they were willing to spend thousands of dollars in legal fees to take her from me. The only explanation that made sense was pure, calculated cruelty. They wanted to punish me for the crime of carrying the wrong chromosome. When I confronted my husband about this betrayal, his response revealed the true depth of their evil plan. I called his mother's house immediately, demanding to speak to him directly. When he finally got on the phone, his voice carried a smugness that chilled me to the bone. He explained, as if he were discussing the weather, that he had realized he didn't want any of his offspring raised by someone as manipulative as me. Even though he didn't actually want our daughter, he was sure he could grow to love her again once she was removed from my toxic influence. The words hit me like physical blows. This wasn't about love or family or even misguided concern for our child's welfare. This was about control, about punishment, about making sure I lost everything as payment for the sin of disappointing them with my gender reveal. But they had made one critical mistake. They underestimated exactly how far a mother will go to protect her child. But the tragedy had not stopped yet. Because when cornered predators realize their prey is fighting back, they reveal their true nature in the most spectacular and self-destructive ways possible. In my desperation to understand what was happening to my life, I turned to the one place where I thought I might find answers and support: Reddit. I posted my story in a community forum, hoping that strangers on the internet might help me make sense of the insanity I was living through. I needed to know if I was crazy, if somehow I really had done something wrong, or if this situation was as twisted as it seemed to my pregnant, hormone-addled brain. What happened next was beyond anything I could have imagined. My story didn't just get a few supportive comments, it exploded across multiple platforms. People shared it, discussed it, analyzed every detail of my husband's family's behavior with the kind of outraged fascination that only truly shocking stories generate. Within days, my post had been featured on podcasts, shared in Facebook groups, and dissected by thousands of strangers who were as horrified by my situation as I was. I tried to stay off social media during this time, focusing on my pregnancy and preparing for the legal battle ahead. My lawyer had advised me to document everything but stay quiet publicly while we built our case. I had no idea that my story was spreading like wildfire, reaching corners of the internet I never knew existed. Then came the moment that would expose my husband's true character to the entire world in the most devastating way possible. Apparently, his new girlfriend, yes, he had already moved on to someone else while I was carrying his child, had been listening to a podcast that featured my story. She recognized enough details to realize that the manipulative, abusive wife being discussed was actually her boyfriend's pregnant ex. The confrontation that followed must have been nuclear, because what my husband did next was so spectacularly unhinged that it destroyed any shred of sympathy he might have had from anyone who read it. He found my Reddit post and left a comment that was so vile, so completely revealing of his true nature, that I screenshot it immediately before he could delete it. In his own words, he called our unborn daughter the fetus, claimed I had manipulated him throughout our entire relationship, and revealed details about our intimate life that no decent person would ever share publicly. He complained that I wouldn't eat sushi because it was bad for the baby, that I was too tired for intimacy some nights, that I occasionally skipped social events due to morning sickness, painting normal pregnancy behavior as evidence of my abuse. But the most telling part of his rant was what he revealed about his new life and his complete lack of remorse. He bragged about having a new girlfriend, threatened to see me in court, and referred to our child as nothing more than a burden he was being forced to deal with. The mask had finally slipped completely, and the man I had loved was revealed to be exactly what his mother had raised him to be. A cruel, entitled narcissist who saw women as objects to be controlled and discarded when they no longer served his purposes. The internet's response was swift and brutal. His comment was screenshot, shared, and torn apart by thousands of people who could now see exactly what kind of person he really was. His own words became the evidence that destroyed his credibility more effectively than anything I could have said about him. What he didn't realize was that his public meltdown had just handed me the most powerful weapon I could have asked for in our upcoming custody battle. Right at that moment when my husband's public meltdown handed me everything I needed to protect my daughter, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting your enemies, but from watching them destroy themselves so completely that the entire world sees their true nature. My lawyer was absolutely thrilled when I showed him the screenshots of my husband's unhinged Reddit comment. "This is better than anything we could have hoped for in Discovery," he told me, with barely contained excitement. "He's just publicly documented his unfitness as a parent, his abusive language toward you and your unborn child, and his complete lack of emotional stability. No family court judge is going to award custody to someone who refers to his own daughter as the fetus and threatens his pregnant ex-wife on social media." The legal team we assembled was formidable, and with my husband's own words working against him, our case became ironclad. But more importantly, I finally understood what I was truly fighting for. This wasn't just about winning a custody battle. This was about ensuring my daughter would never grow up in an environment where her worth was determined by her gender, where love came with impossible conditions, where manipulation masqueraded as family loyalty. But the most powerful moment of vindication came from an entirely unexpected source. My brother-in-law, the firstborn son who had always been the golden child of the family, called me personally to deliver news that felt like poetic justice. He and his wife were cutting ties with the family completely after witnessing how I had been treated. They had a daughter of their own, and seeing the vicious misogyny directed at me made them realize what kind of toxic environment they were potentially exposing their child to. "What they did to you opened our eyes," he told me, his voice heavy with regret. "We always knew Mom had strong opinions about family roles, but we never realized she was capable of this level of cruelty. If they could destroy a marriage and try to steal a baby over gender disappointment, what would they do to our daughter as she grows up? What impossible standards would they hold her to?" The fact that the family's precious firstborn son was walking away from them because of their treatment of me felt like the ultimate validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't manipulative. I was a woman who had been systematically targeted and destroyed by people who couldn't accept that they weren't entitled to control every aspect of their children's lives. As my due date approached, I made decisions that would protect not just my daughter, but future generations of women in our family. My daughter would carry my maiden name, not hyphenated, not compromised, but proudly bearing the name of the family that had supported me through this nightmare. I secured my own place. Far enough away to ensure surprise visits were impossible, but close enough to my support system to feel safe. Every legal document was updated to reflect my new reality as a single mother with full decision-making authority over my child's upbringing. The community that had formed around my story continued to offer support, advice, and encouragement as I prepared for single motherhood. Strangers became allies, offering everything from baby clothes to legal advice to simple words of encouragement that carried me through the darkest moments. Today, as I write this final update, I'm not the broken, abandoned pregnant woman who woke up to that devastating note months ago. I'm a mother preparing to welcome a daughter who will grow up knowing her worth isn't determined by anyone else's expectations. She'll never have to smile through jokes about her value or apologize for existing in a body that disappointed someone else's dreams. Most importantly, she'll learn from my example that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who claim to love you but treat you like you're disposable. My daughter's story begins where mine found its strength, with the radical act of choosing yourself when everyone else has chosen to abandon you. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one who attacks you directly, It's the one who smiles while systematically destroying your life. Trust your instincts when family dynamics feel toxic. Document everything. And remember that protecting your children from manipulation disguised as love is the greatest gift you can give them. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to help others find it. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And subscribe to join our community of resilient souls who've learned that sometimes being underestimated is your greatest superpower. Together, we're writing new endings to old stories, and I can't wait to share the next chapter with you.